there is a question that arrives in the quiet, usually after the lights go out and the world has finally gone still. It doesn't announce itself with words. Exactly. It comes more as a feeling, a low, persistent ache beneath all the doing, the striving, the trying to be better, to do more, to finally arrive somewhere you cannot quite name. Am I enough? You have asked this in 100 different ways. In the mirror, in the silence after a difficult conversation, in the gap between who you believe yourself to be and who you somehow think you should become. Tonight, you are invited to rest inside a different question. Not am I enough, but simply what if I already am? For 2,000 years and across the mountain monasteries of Korea, the bamboo groves of Vietnam, the forest paths of ancient India, the quiet stone gardens of Japan, and the hermit caves of remote Himalayan slopes, teachers have pointed to something that was never lost, a wholeness that cannot be broken, a completeness that needs nothing added, a nature so fundamental it was present before you learned your own name. These are contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom from many traditions, offered tonight for rest, reflection, and the quiet companionship of ancient hearts. They are not medical advice. They are doorways, and you need not knock. You are already standing inside. So let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw release. Let your breath find its own pace without any help from you. You don't have to become anything tonight. You never did. Let the first story carry you now, all the way to the mountains of 13th century Korea, where a young monk named Hyun-woo was about to discover that what he had searched half his life to find had never, not once, left him. There is a particular quality to the air on the Korean peninsula in late autumn, when the mountains have finished their burning, when the last maple has dropped its red entirely and the ridgelines stand bare and clean against a sky, the color of ash. In the 12th century, in the high ranges of what is now South Korea, there were monasteries clinging to those ridges like old birds to branches, their wooden halls creaking in wind that came down from the north, carrying the smell of frozen stone. The monks who lived there woke before dawn and lit incense in the dark and sat facing walls until their knees ached with cold, asking a single question with everything they had: what is my original nature? The question was not academic. It was the hinge on which a life could turn. Hyun-woo was 23 years old when he arrived at Cheongwon Temple in the southwest lowlands, soaking wet from a 3-day walk through autumn rain. He had come from a family of ink makers in the city of Gaesong, where his father ground charcoal into powder with hands permanently stained black, and his mother kept a small shrine to the Buddha beside the kitchen door that she bowed to each morning before the coals in the stove were lit. He had grown up between those two worlds, the practical and the devotional, the blackened hands and the bowing head. When he was 16, a traveling monk had passed through and eaten at their table, and something the monk said over his bowl of millet, something Hyun-woo could not afterward remember precisely, had opened a trapdoor beneath him that he had been falling through ever since. He could not go back to the ink. He could not stay with ordinary life. He burned to understand something he could not name, and burning had driven him, eventually, to this temple, to this courtyard, to this precise moment of standing dripping and shivering before a gatekeeper monk who looked him over without expression. He was allowed in. The abbot assigned Hyun-woo to the kitchen for the first 3 months. He chopped radishes and carried water from the well in heavy ceramic jars, and when his back ached, he was told to keep working, and when his hands blistered, he was told to keep working. And in the evenings he sat in the meditation hall with 30 other monks who seemed, to his burning eyes, impossibly calm. He watched them and felt his own mind like a marketplace, loud, crowded, goods being haggled over in every corner. He tried to quiet it. The harder he tried, the louder it grew. By winter, he was desperate in a way he had not expected. He had imagined spiritual practice as an arrival, as stepping through a door into a room where things finally made sense. Instead, it was more like walking in circles in a forest, and each time he thought he glimpsed the path, it dissolved into undergrowth. He began to doubt whether he had ever had what it took. Maybe the other monks, the calm ones, the ones whose faces in meditation looked like the face of the moon, maybe they had been born with something he had not been given. Maybe the Buddha nature that the teaching spoke of was in them but not in him. This thought arrived one evening and settled like snow, quietly and completely, covering everything. He approached the head monk, a man named Won Hak, who had the weathered look of someone who had lived many years outdoors and had stopped minding. Sunim, Hyunwoo said, using the honorific for a monastic. I believe I may have made a mistake in coming here. The teachings say that all beings possess Buddha nature. But I sit in the hall each evening and I find nothing of the kind. I find only noise and craving and confusion. I think perhaps there are those who have this nature and those who do not, and I am among the latter. Won Hak was silent for a moment. He was sorting dried barley in a wooden tray, his fingers moving through the grain with practiced ease, separating the chaff. Tell me, he said, finally, still looking at the barley, when you are confused, who knows that you are confused? Hyunwoo opened his mouth, closed it. When your mind is noisy, Won Hak continued, who is it that hears the noise? Silence. When you doubt that you have Buddha nature, what is it in you that is capable of that doubt? A stone cannot doubt. A handful of barley cannot wonder about itself. Something in you knows that you are confused, is aware that you are seeking. What is that something? Hyunwoo stood very still. The kitchen smelled of dried ginger and smoke. I don't know, he said. Good, said Won Hak simply, and went back to his barley. The conversation should have been unsatisfying. Hyunwoo turned it over for days, expecting frustration to bloom, and it did not. Instead, something strange happened. Each time he returned to that question in the meditation hall, who is it that knows I am confused? There was a kind of stillness behind the question, a quality of open attention that the question itself seemed to arise within. It was like turning around to look at your own eyes. The looking itself was what you were looking for. He went back to Won Hak 3 weeks later. I have been sitting with the question you gave me, he said, and I noticed something. The awareness that knows I am confused, it does not itself seem confused. The knowing doesn't struggle. It is just there, clearly, before I do anything about it. Won Hak nodded once, as though Hyunwoo had identified a familiar landmark. Now, the elder monk said, sit with that, not with the question. With what the question found. What followed was not a dramatic awakening of the kind Hyunwoo had imagined, no crack of lightning, no sudden luminosity, no feeling of vast liberation flooding through him. What happened was quieter and more destabilizing than anything dramatic could have been. Over the following weeks, he began to notice first rarely, then often a quality of presence underneath his thoughts that seemed to have been there all along. Not a thing he had built or earned or grown. Not the product of 3 months of radish chopping and sitting and striving. Something that seemed to predate all of that. Something that had been present, wordlessly, the whole time he had been searching for it. The searching itself had been happening within it. He thought of a story he had heard once, of a man who had lost his spectacles and spent a frantic morning overturning his house in search of them, only to be told by his wife that they had been on his face the whole time. There was something almost embarrassing about it, and something deeply tender too. The spectacles on the face, the awareness you were looking for. He went to Wonhak one last time before the spring traveling season began, when monks would move between monasteries to study with different teachers. "I am not sure I have realized anything," Hyunwoo said carefully. "I feel I have found something, but I also feel I may be fooling myself." Wonhak looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of a man deciding whether to say the obvious thing. "The great master Jinul," he said at last, naming the reformer who had shaped Korean Seon practice in the previous century, taught that sudden awakening and gradual cultivation are not opposites. One can see, in a flash, that the sun exists, but the snow in the valley still takes time to melt. You have perhaps seen that the sun is there. That is enough. Do not demand that the valley clear in the same instant. "But what if I saw wrongly? What would it mean to see wrongly?" Wonhak asked. "You are asking whether the awareness that knows your confusion is truly aware. Notice that the question itself requires the very awareness you are questioning. It is arguing with its own feet." Hyunwoo stood with that a long time. Outside, a single crow called from the pine tree in the courtyard. The sound hung in the cold air and dissolved. He bowed and left, and he carried with him, through all the seasons that followed, through years of continued practice, through periods of clarity and periods of fog, through the ordination he eventually received and the students who eventually came to him, something he could not quite articulate, but also could not lose. It was not knowledge in the usual sense. It was more like the bone-level recognition of something that had always been the case, which practice had simply made impossible to keep ignoring. That what he was looking for had been looking all along. That the seeker and the sought were not in different rooms. Now, let the story settle into you like the evening settling into a mountain valley, not in a rush, not loudly, but simply darkening and deepening in its own time. We speak often, don't we, about finding ourselves, about the long search for peace, for wholeness, for the feeling that we are finally, at last, enough. But Hyunwoo's quiet discovery points to something that can stop the search in its tracks, not by answering the question, but by gently questioning the question itself. The mind that is searching for peace, is it itself peaceful? Look closely. The awareness that knows you are anxious, is it itself anxious? The consciousness that witnesses your thoughts right now, does it shake when the thoughts shake? In the Korean Seon tradition, practitioners called this the knowing, sometimes called the bright awareness, or the original face. And the radical insight at the heart of this tradition is that this awareness is not something you have to create, cultivate, or deserve. It is what is already here, doing the noticing. You cannot be further from it than you are from your own face. This is not a comfortable teaching at first, because our conditioning runs so deep. We have been trained by schools, by workplaces, by families, by the quiet accumulation of everything we have been told about what it means to be good enough to believe that wholeness is a destination, a reward, something unlocked by sufficient effort, suffisante vertu, sufficient transformation. And so we sit down to practice, as Hyunwoo sat down, and we are convinced the peace is out there, the other side of some inner door we have not yet found the key for. But what if the door is already open? What if the peace is not inside the room at all, but is the space the room exists within? Feel that possibility for a moment, not as a thought to analyze, but as a kind of weight you might set down. Notice, right now, that you are aware. That's all. Just notice awareness happening. You don't have to try to be aware, it is already occurring. Your body is being breathed without your instruction. Your heart is beating in the dark beneath your ribs, and somewhere in you, gently, effortlessly, there is a quality of open knowing that does not depend on everything going well. That knowing that is what every tradition gathered in these mountains of Korea was trying to point at. Not a state to achieve, not a self to improve. The open sky in which all the weather of your mind appears and passes, unchanged, unstained, already whole. You don't need to become that. You already are it. The snow in the valley might take time to melt, but the sun has always been shining. Feel your breath moving now, not because you're making it move, but because it is moving on its own, and you can simply feel it. Feel the surface beneath you, holding you without effort. Let your body grow a little heavier, a little warmer. You don't have to go anywhere tonight. You don't have to understand anything more deeply than you already do. Just this noticing, this quiet, this enough. And as that searching begins to soften, as the old question, am I enough, grows quieter and quieter in the warm dark we travel now, gently, across the centuries and across the sea. We travel south to a kingdom at the edge of the 13th century world, where a king in silk robes sat in a lamplit chamber and felt, for the first time in his life, that his treasury held nothing he actually needed. Let your body settle a little more. Let your breath slow. If your eyes grow heavy, let them close. Rest is welcome here. The royal kitchens of Thanglong Palace, in the year 1293, produced a breakfast fit for gods: sticky rice steamed in lotus leaves, roasted sesame paste, pickled plum, thin slices of starfruit arranged like the petals of a flower on a lacquered tray. The servants who carried this tray through the corridors each morning moved carefully, not because the food was heavy, but because it was destined for an emperor, and emperors were not kept waiting for their breakfasts. On this particular morning, however, the emperor was not in his chamber. His attending servant found the bed made, the incense cold, the silk sleeping robe folded neatly over the stand as though its owner had departed with unusual deliberateness. A slip of paper on the low writing table bore 3 lines in the emperor's own hand. The servant, whose name was Min and who had served at the palace since he was 9 years old, could not read. He carried the paper to the head chamberlain, who could, and who read it twice before sitting down heavily on a bench and staring at the floor for a long time. The paper said only this: I am going to the mountain. Do not search for me. Look after the people as I have looked after them with a quiet heart. The man who had written those words was Tran Nan Tong, 3rd ruler of the Tran dynasty. The king who had twice led his people to victory against the Mongol armies, those vast, terrifying waves of cavalry that had swallowed kingdoms whole and had emerged both times, not with the swagger of conquest, but with a kind of quietude that those around him could never quite account for. He was 35 years old when he had abdicated the throne to his son 4 years earlier. He had spent those 4 years moving through the country like a pilgrim, giving Dharma talks in market squares and riverside villages, sleeping in temple courtyards, eating whatever the morning bowl brought. But Yentu Mountain had been calling him with increasing urgency, the way the sea calls back whatever the tide has temporarily deposited on shore. Yentu rose in the northeast, in what is now Kwangnin province, draped in cloud and old-growth forest pine trees, 200 years old, their roots gripping the rock like the fingers of someone who has never once let go of what matters. The mountain had been a place of practice for generations of hermit monks who had built small pagodas in the cliffs, reachable only by stone paths so steep that visitors sometimes had to climb on hands and knees. Bamboo grew in dense groves on the upper slopes, their hollow stalks tapping against each other in the wind with a sound like very soft applause. Tran Nan Tong arrived at Yen Tu on foot, which was itself an extraordinary thing for a man who had spent the previous decade being carried in palanquins by 8 bearers. He had walked through 3 days of rain, his robes muddied to the knee, his hair unbound. He carried a walking staff cut from bamboo and a cloth sack containing a change of clothes, a bowl, and a copy of the Diamond Sutra so worn from reading that the cover had separated from the pages and been tied back with a strip of cotton. The abbot of the small temple at the mountain's mid-level, a monk of great age named Tua Kwang, opened the gate and looked at the former emperor for a long moment without bowing. "You came," he said simply. "I should have come sooner," said Tran Han Tong. "You came when you were ready. That is when things happen." He was given the smallest cell, which was actually no cell at all, but a wooden platform built against a cliff face, open to the weather on one side. For its roof, a single sheet of oiled paper stretched across a bamboo frame. In the rainy season, water came through. In the cold season, wind came through. Tran Nan Tong slept on the wooden boards with a thin cotton mat beneath him and a thin cotton blanket above, and found, to his genuine astonishment, that he slept better than he had at any point in his life. He rose with the birds. He swept the stone path. He carried water from the spring. He sat in meditation in the bamboo grove, while the morning fog rolled through the stalks and a pair of cranes hunted in the shallow stream below. When he was hungry, he ate rice and whatever vegetables the temple garden had produced. When he was tired, he slept. He had carried with him from the palace a lifelong habit of arranging the world around himself into elegant order audiences, documents, tea, strategies, decisions, and that habit, deprived of its usual material, began slowly to dissolve, like salt in warm water. One evening, about a month into his residence on the mountain, a young monk came to him. The monk's name was Phap Loa, and he had come from a village in the lowlands after meeting the former emperor by chance during one of the Dharma tours through the countryside. He was perhaps 18 years old, with the serious, slightly overworked face of someone who had arrived at questions before he had arrived at any peace with them. He sat across from Tran Han Tong in the fading light and said, without much preamble, "Teacher, I have been practicing for 2 years. I sit in the mornings. I study the sutras in the afternoons. I am careful about my precepts. But I feel no different than I did before I began. I look at you and I see someone who was once an emperor and who seems now to be at peace with sweeping stone paths. How do you arrive at that? What am I missing?" Tran Han Tong was quiet for a moment, watching the last light move slowly up the cliff face opposite them, climbing toward the ridge, the way a thought climbs toward understanding. "When you were a child," he said at last, "before you knew anything about Buddhism, did you know how to feel joy?" "Of course." "And sorrow?" "Yes." "And wonder, that thing that happens when you see something beautiful or strange?" "Yes." Tran Nan Tong nodded slowly. "The Buddha nature you are looking for through your practice, can you tell me that it is not the very awareness that was capable of all those things? Can you tell me it is separate from the part of you that recognized joy when it arose, that knew sorrow as sorrow? The awareness that knows experience, did you build that? Did you earn it through good behavior?" Phap Loa frowned. "No. It was simply there. It is still simply there, said Tran Han Tong. Practice does not create it. Practice is what happens when you stop believing the thought that it is absent. He reached into his cloth sack and brought out a piece of dried mango he had been given by a pilgrim that morning, wrinkled, dark, intensely sweet. He broke it in two and handed half to the young monk. My teacher, Tue Trung, he continued, said something to me when I was still a crown prince, still carrying the future of the kingdom around in my chest like a stone. He said, there is no Buddha in the mountains. Buddha is right in the heart. A quiet heart that knows that is the true Buddha. You do not need to search outside. He was silent a moment, chewing the mango. I heard those words when I was 20 years old. I believed them in the way you believe something you have read in a book. It was not until I sat on this mountain in a cell with a leaking roof and no one needing anything from me that I understood them in the way you understand rain, not as a concept, but as something falling on your skin. But how do you practice? Then, if the nature is already there, Tran Nan Tong smiled. And it was the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, unhurried. The way you practice breathing, he said, which is to say, you stop interfering. Phap Loa stayed on Yen Tu and became, in time, the second patriarch of the Bamboo Grove School. He would go on to build hundreds of monasteries across the country, to train thousands of monks, to carry the teaching his teacher had given him, the treasure is within. Cease seeking into villages and valleys and fishing communities along the coast, until it became woven into the fabric of Vietnamese Buddhist life, like the smell of incense woven into old wooden temples. Something you breathe without noticing, something that was always already there. But on this particular evening, he simply sat with the former emperor on a wooden platform on the face of a mountain, eating dried mango while the last cranes called from the stream below, while the bamboo tapped its soft applause in the dark above them, while the fog came rolling in from the valley and settled around their feet like something that had been traveling a long way and had finally, gratefully, arrived. Before he left for the night, Phap Loa asked one more question. Teacher, you said you slept here better than at any point in your life. But surely a king's bed is better than a wooden board. Tran Nan Tong considered this with appropriate seriousness. In the palace, he said, I carried a kingdom to bed with me every night. Treaties, grain supplies, the faces of soldiers who had not come home. Here, I carry only the sound of bamboo and the weight of my own body. The body, and he placed one hand flat against the boards beside him, is not so heavy when you put the kingdom down. He paused. When I was a king, he continued softly, I believed that rest would come after I had done enough. After the wars were won, after the borders were secure, after my son was ready to take the throne, there was always one more thing after which rest would be permitted. Do you recognize this feeling? Phap Loa was quiet. Now, said Tran Nan Tong, I understand that rest was never on the other side of anything. It was always here. It was the stillness underneath everything I was doing. I simply could not feel it while I was running away from it toward one more task. He looked at the young monk in the way that teachers sometimes look at students, not with authority but with recognition. The way one person recognizes in another's face a country they themselves once lived in. The treasure is within, he said. It always was. You are not looking for something you have lost. You are looking at something you have forgotten you are standing on. There is something in this story that reaches across 7 centuries with the particular gentleness of someone who knows what it is to be exhausted by achievement. We live, so many of us, in the emperor's palace. Not in silk and lacquer, but in the modern version, the inbox that is never fully cleared. The career that is always one promotion away from feeling secure. The version of ourselves we are perpetually almost becoming. We carry kingdoms to bed. We negotiate with ourselves. After this project, after this weight is lost, after this relationship is repaired, after this fear is resolved, then I will rest. Then I will finally feel enough. But Tran Nhan Tong, a man who had defeated the Mongol Empire twice, who had held the weight of an entire nation's survival in his hands and carried it with dignity, this man went to a mountain and slept on a wooden board and found, in that simplicity, the rest that no silk mattress had ever provided. Not because the board was better than the mattress, because he had, at last, put the kingdom down. What are you carrying to bed tonight? Not the obvious things, the worries you know you carry, but the quiet, background ones. The long-running inner story that says you are not yet quite there, not yet good enough, not yet finished becoming who you need to become before you can rest. What if that story is not the truth? What if it is simply a habit of mind, as old as the crown prince who had been told from birth that he was responsible for the survival of everything? When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. These words, from Tran Nhan Tong's own poem, are almost embarrassingly simple, which is precisely the point. The naturalness that seemed to require no cultivation, the ordinary life that needed no improving before it could be inhabited fully, the rest that was never on the other side of something, the rest that was always here. Feel the weight of your body right now, not as something to improve or change, just as weight. The simple, honest gravity of a body that has been carrying you all day and is ready now to be still. Let the surface beneath you hold that weight completely. You don't have to hold yourself up anymore. Nothing to achieve. Nothing to become. The treasure is not in some future room you have not yet unlocked. It is in the chest you are breathing with right now. Just this. Just resting. The bamboo tapping in the dark. The fog coming in from the valley. Already home. Already enough. Already whole. If your eyes grow heavy, let them close. You are welcome to drift. The story continues, and it will carry you, but your body can go ahead to sleep whenever it chooses. Nothing will be lost. And as that old searching for enough begins to quiet in you, like an emperor finally setting down his crown, we travel now, eastward across the centuries, to a forest in ancient India, where a young woman carrying grief the size of a mountain discovered that what she needed had never been absent from her, not for a single breath. Let your shoulders fall a little more. Let the night hold you. In the city of Sravasti, in the ancient kingdom of Kosala, in the time when the Buddha Shakyamuni was still walking the roads of northern India, teaching whoever would listen, there lived a young woman named Gautami who had been given a nickname she had not chosen and would not have chosen if anyone had thought to ask her. They called her Kisa Gautami, lean Gautami, because she was thin, and because the people who give nicknames to women are rarely kind about it. She had grown up poor in a city that organized its respect according to what you owned, and she had grown into young womanhood with the particular hunger of someone who has been made to feel, in 100 small daily ways, that she does not quite belong to the category of people who deserve good things. When she married into a merchant family of some standing, she believed, with the sincere belief of someone who has wanted something for a very long time, that this was the arrival she had been moving toward. A household with real floors, not packed earth, silk rather than cotton. A place at the communal meal table where no one would look through her as though she were a smudge on the wall. What she found instead was that the merchant family had its own calculus of belonging. and she had arrived without the currency it required. She was from a poor family, which they reminded her of in the way people remind you of things they do not wish you to forget, not with words, but with the particular quality of silence that falls when you enter a room. She was, in their accounting, insufficient, thin in body, thin in lineage, thin in the silent inheritance of dignity that wealthy families believe is stored in their bloodlines like interest accruing in a locked chest. She bore this with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to go, and she turned, privately, toward the only thing she had learned to rely on, herself. Not in the triumphant way people mean when they say that. In the much quieter way, the way of keeping your eyes down and your hands occupied and your needs small enough that they wouldn't attract the particular cruelty of being seen to want. And then she bore a son. She had not understood, before this, what it meant for the world to reorganize itself around a single point of light. But that is what happened. The boy came into her arms in the early hours of a monsoon morning, slippery and red, and screaming with the magnificent outrage of new existence. And Kisagutami felt something in her chest that she had no language for, because nothing in her previous life had prepared her to receive it. The merchant family noticed the birth it produced, an air, and the quality of silence when she entered rooms changed slightly, became less absolute. She noticed this, filed it away, and did not trust it, because she had learned long ago not to trust the goodwill of people who had previously withheld it without cost. But the boy she trusted completely. He had a laugh that he deployed like a gift, scattering it freely across the household, and he reached for her face with both hands when she leaned over his sleeping mat, and he smelled of warm milk and new skin. And Kisagutami, who had spent her entire life feeling like a provisional presence in every room she occupied, understood for the first time what it was to be someone's absolute center, to be precisely and entirely what was needed, to be, without effort, enough. He died when he was just old enough to walk. A fever came on a Tuesday and took him by the following Sunday, and the household moved on from this with the particular efficiency that houses use to move on from things that have stopped being useful. And Kisagutami did not. She carried him. This is the fact that the Pali texts record with great care and no embellishment. She carried the dead child on her hip, as she had carried him when he was living, and she went from door to door in the city of Sravasti, asking for medicine that would bring him back. People said she had gone mad. Perhaps she had. But the madness was not random. It had a very specific shape. It was the shape of a woman who had organized her entire sense of worth around one point of light and could not process what it meant that the light had gone out. She asked a silk merchant. She asked a water carrier. She asked a woman grinding lentils in a courtyard who looked up at her with the deep, exhausted pity of someone who has seen too much suffering to pretend it isn't there. There is no medicine for that. Sister, the woman said gently. There must be, said Kisagutami, and kept walking. It was an old man at the edge of the market, a seller of clay pots who had been watching the gods arrange and rearrange human fate for 80 years and had arrived at a kind of serene bewilderment about the whole enterprise, who told her to go to the monastery at Jetavana, where the wandering teacher called the Awakened One was currently residing. He is a physician of a different kind, the old man said. Go and tell him your trouble. She found the Buddha seated beneath a large tree in the monastery garden, surrounded by the particular quality of stillness that certain people generate around themselves, not through any visible effort, but simply through the way they occupy space. He was not young. He had the face of a man who had walked a very long way and had, somewhere along the road, stopped fighting the walking. Kisagutami did not bow. She had arrived past the point where social forms were available to her. She stood before him with the child on her hip and said simply, with a ferocity that was also a kind of prayer, "Give me medicine for my son." The Buddha looked at her for a moment with an attention so complete it was almost physical, the kind of attention that makes you feel, paradoxically, both entirely seen and entirely safe. "I can help you," he said. "But first I need something from you. I need a small handful of mustard seeds taken from any household in the city where no one has died." Mustard seed was the cheapest spice in the market. A single coin would buy enough to fill both palms. Kisa Gotami turned immediately and went back into the city, the child still on her hip, because she had learned a long time ago that when someone gives you a task, you accomplish it before they have time to take it back. She went to the nearest house and knocked. "Do you have mustard seeds?" she asked the woman, who answered, "Of course. How much do you need?" "Only a handful. But I need to know, has anyone in this household died?" The woman's face shifted into a different arrangement, the way faces rearrange themselves around a memory that is not entirely past. "My mother-in-law," she said. 3 years ago." Kisa Gotami thanked her and moved to the next house. And the next. And the one after that. At each door the pattern repeated with a patience that was beginning, beneath her awareness, to teach her something she was not yet ready to know. A grandfather, a daughter, a husband taken by fever, a child, and here the face of the woman at the door cracked like old pottery, and the two women looked at each other across the threshold with the particular recognition of people who have carried the same shape of grief. "Keep your seeds," Kisa Gotami told her. "I am sorry for your loss." She walked until her feet were raw and the light was failing, and the city had begun to quiet around her into its nighttime version of itself, with cooking fires glowing in doorways and dogs settling into corners and children being called in from alleys by their mothers' voices. She sat down on a stone at the edge of a well and held the dead child in her lap and looked at the flickering lights of Sravasti and watched them, one by one, go dark. Something was happening that she could not have named if asked. It was not a thought exactly. It was more like a structure giving way, a wall she had not known she was leaning against, dissolving quietly, leaving her standing without support in open air. She had believed, in the particular way the grief-struck believe things, that she had been singled out, that her loss was a special category of loss, that the gods or fortune or the organizing principle of the universe had looked across all the people in Sravasti and selected her, Leen Gotami, specifically as the recipient of this particular devastation, because that was, of course, what had always happened to her. She had always been the one the world chose to pass over, to look through, to deprive. She had organized her entire inner life around the certainty of being uniquely insufficient, uniquely alone in her suffering. But the doors had been telling her something all day. And now, sitting at the well in the falling dark, she finally heard it. The living are few, but the dead are many. Not one household, not one family, not one city. The woman with the daughter, the woman with the husband, the woman at the door whose face had split open in recognition of the same grief, carried in the same shape. "It is not just me," she said aloud, to no one. She sat with this for a long time. It did not immediately make anything better. It is an error of the sentimental mind to imagine that recognition always brings relief. Sometimes it brings a vaster ache, the opening of a single wound into something that encompasses the whole of human experience. And that is briefly more overwhelming than the original injury. But there is something else that comes with it. Quieter. Arriving later. Like a tide that doesn't announce itself. The slow, extraordinary discovery that a grief you carry alone is one kind of weight, and a grief that is recognized as the shared inheritance of every person who has ever loved anything. That grief becomes something different. It becomes a door rather than a wall. Kisa Gotami laid her son's body gently down at the side of the well. She sat with him for a while longer in the dark. And then she did what she had been unable to do before. She said goodbye. She returned to the monastery and found the Buddha still sitting beneath the tree as though he had not moved, which perhaps he had not. "I could not find the mustard seeds," she said. "There is no house in the city where no one has died." "I know," he said simply. She looked at him. "You sent me out knowing what I would find. I sent you out knowing what you needed to find," he said. "There is a small difference." She sat down across from him in the dark beneath the tree, and the monks who were present gave her space. The way people give space to someone who has just returned from somewhere important. "I believed I was alone in this," she said. "That belief," the Buddha said, "is the second arrow. The first arrow is the grief itself, which is real and cannot be avoided. The second arrow is the story we add to the grief that we have been singled out, that we are uniquely broken, that our suffering is a verdict about our worth. That second arrow we shoot ourselves, and it goes deeper than the first." He let the silence hold that for a while. "You are not alone," he said. "You have never been alone. Your grief is real, and it belongs to you. But the belief that your grief makes you different from the rest of humanity, that belief was the thing that was making you carry him through the streets. Not love. Love would have let him rest." She wept. Then, for the first time. Not the wild, displaced weeping of the previous days, but something cleaner, less theatrical, the specific weeping that happens when a truth finally arrives that you have been resisting for a long time, and the resistance gives way. When it passed, she felt, underneath the sorrow, something she had not felt in many years. She could not name it immediately. She sat with it a moment before she understood. It was the same thing she had felt when her son laughed and reached for her face with both hands. The sense of being precisely where she was, exactly as she was, without needing to be otherwise. "I would like to stay," she said. "And learn?" "You are already learning," said the Buddha. "You have been learning all day." There is something in Kisa Gotami's story that reaches directly into the part of us that has spent years believing we are uniquely broken, that our anxiety is worse than other people's, that our loneliness is more absolute, that the particular quality of our struggle is something that sets us apart from the rest of humanity in a way that is, beneath everything, shameful. This belief, the belief that our suffering makes us separate, is precisely what the Pali tradition calls the second arrow. The first arrow is what life does to us. Loss, disappointment, fear, rejection. Those are real, and they land, and they hurt, and no teaching in the world should suggest otherwise. But the second arrow is what we do to ourselves afterward. The story we add, the verdict we render. This happened to me because I am fundamentally insufficient. I am more broken than others. I am alone in this. The second arrow goes in at an angle that makes it harder to remove than the first. But here is what Kisa Gotami discovered. Going door to door through a city of grief she had believed was hers alone, every house, every single house. The woman with the daughter, the man who lost a parent, the neighbor who recognized her expression because she wore the same one. You are not uniquely broken. You are uniquely human. And those two things are entirely different. The loneliness you carry tonight, the kind that arrives in the dark when the thinking finally slows, that loneliness is not a verdict about your worth. It is one of the oldest and most widely distributed experiences in the history of conscious beings. People have felt exactly this. In cold rooms and monsoon heat, in cities of 100,000, and in houses with one candle. The feeling that you are somehow more alone than others is itself the very mechanism that deepens the aloneness. And here is the tenderness within the teaching. The moment you recognize that your suffering is not a measure of your brokenness, but rather evidence of your humanity, something shifts. Not completely, not all at once, but the weight rearranges itself. A grief shared by everyone who has ever loved anything is still a grief. But it becomes a door between you and every other grieving person rather than a wall. Feel that door in your chest right now, just a crack of it. The recognition that you are not alone, that the worry you carry, the self-doubt, the quiet ache, these are not signs that something is wrong with you specifically. They are the texture of what it means to be a person who cares. And caring means there is something in you that is open, that matters, that can be touched by things. That openness is not a flaw. It is the most whole part of you. Let your body settle a little deeper into where it rests. Feel your breath coming and going without your help. Somewhere in the city tonight, in the country, across the ocean, someone else is lying awake with something similar moving through them. You are not alone in this. You never have been. You never will be. You don't have to solve anything tonight. But you only have to let the second arrow come out. The grief is real, and it belongs to you. But the story that your grief makes you insufficient, that story you can set down. Gently. Right here, right now. Let the breath carry that. Let the blanket's weight hold you. Nothing to fix. Only this settling, this quiet arrival, this returning to the knowledge that you are not separate from the rest of the human family, no matter how alone the dark can feel. And as that belief in your own separateness begins to soften, as the wall begins to become a door, we move now. Without hurry, further east, to China, in the 9th century, where a young scholar arrived at the monastery of a Chan master who was about to teach him something so simple it would take him 10 years to understand. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your body choose its own depth of rest. If sleep comes, welcome it. If you drift, that is exactly right. The young monk, Zhao Zhou, arrived at Nanquan's monastery on a morning in early spring, when the Jiangxi hills were the color of new copper coins and the air smelled of wet earth and the first green things pressing through it. He was perhaps 17 years old, accounts differ, as accounts of young prodigies always do, but young enough that his face had not yet settled into the permanent arrangement that decades of practice would eventually give it. He had walked for 3 days from his home province, carrying a bedroll and a bowl, and a question he had been carrying much longer than 3 days. The question was this: what do I need to become? He did not ask it exactly this way. He was too intelligent to ask it so plainly. But it was the shape underneath all his other questions, the bone beneath the flesh of every inquiry he had brought to every teacher he had encountered. What attainment was required? What level of mastery? What transformation of his current, flawed and restless self into something refined enough, still enough, pure enough, to touch the thing that the tradition called awakening? He had been serious about practice since he was 13. He had read what there was to read. He had sat in meditation until his knees were permanent complaints. He had interviewed teachers, and found them pointing in directions that were each slightly different and somehow all pointing at the same place, which was nowhere he had managed to arrive. The monastery of Nanquan Puyuan sat on a modest rise above a river, surrounded by old pine trees that had been dropping needles for longer than any of the monks currently living there had been alive. The needles had composted into a rich, dark layer over the stone paths, so that footsteps were silent, and you could walk through the entire compound without hearing yourself arrive or depart. Zhao Zhou found this either deeply appropriate or slightly unnerving. He had not yet decided which. Nanquan received him in the garden, where the master was transplanting a row of turnips with the focused attention of someone for whom the difference between a well-planted and a poorly planted turnip was a matter of real consequence. He did not look up when Zhao Zhou arrived. He did not offer any of the formal courtesies that young monks expected when approaching established masters. He simply moved his trowel through the dark earth and set another seedling. After a long enough silence that Zhao Zhou had to decide whether to speak or to be silent himself, he spoke. "Master, I have come to study. I want to know the way." Nanquan looked up then, with the calm, slightly amused expression of a man who has heard this exact sentence several hundred times and finds it simultaneously tiresome and deeply touching. "Have you eaten your breakfast?" he asked. Zhao Zhou blinked. "Yes," he said. "Then go wash your bowl," said Nanquan, and returned to his turnips. This was not the answer Zhao Zhou had walked 3 days to receive. He went and washed his bowl. He was assigned a sleeping space and a duty carrying water from the well to the kitchen, and he carried water, and he ate his meals, and he sat in the meditation hall with the other monks. And the weeks became months, and every time he tried to formulate the important question in a way that would produce the important answer. Something about the quality of life in that monastery deflected him. Not the master specifically. The master barely spoke to him. But the monastery itself had a quality that Zhao Zhou could not name, a kind of ease, an absence of the urgency he had carried in his chest since he was 13, and he could not tell if the ease was wisdom or complacency, and the inability to tell disturbed him. One evening, in the thin light after the evening meal, he caught Nanquan walking alone between the pine trees and seized the occasion with the determination of someone who has been waiting a long time. "Master," he said, stepping into the path. "What is the way?" Nanquan stopped. He looked at Zhao Zhou with the particular quality of attention that his better students had learned to recognize, not an examining attention, not a testing attention, but something more like the attention you give to rain when it begins, noting it simply because it is there. "Ordinary mind," Nanquan said, "is the way." Zhao Zhou stood with this for a moment. "Then should I direct myself toward it? If you try to turn toward it," said Nanquan, "you go against it." "But," Zhao Zhou said, with the careful persistence of someone who has come too far to accept an answer that doesn't fully land, "if I don't turn toward it, how will I know it?" Nanquan was quiet for a moment. A single pine needle fell from the tree above them, making no sound on the soft path. "The way," he said at last, "does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is blankness. When you have genuinely arrived at the way, you will find it as vast as the open sky. You will not be able to talk about it in terms of right and wrong. You will not be able to locate it by turning toward or away." He paused. "It will simply be what is already here." Something shifted in Zhao Zhou then. Not a dramatic shift, not the thunderclap of awakening that the stories he had grown up hearing always promised. Something quieter. The way a knot you have been worrying at for a long time will sometimes, without warning, simply release. He did not speak. Nanquan looked at him for a moment, nodded very slightly, the nod of a man who has seen what he expected to see, and continued walking into the trees. Zhao Zhou stayed at Nanquan's monastery for 20 years. This fact surprises people who expect the great masters of the tradition to have been formed in flashes of brilliance and then dispatched into the world, carrying their luminosity like lanterns. But Zhao Zhou was not like that. He was formed the way river stones are formed by long, patient exposure to the same water, flowing over the same surfaces, wearing away exactly what needed, wearing away what he discovered over those 20 years of carrying water and washing bowls and transplanting turnips and sitting in the quiet hall and talking with students who themselves came with burning questions and 3-day walks behind them. What he discovered was something that could not be put into words adequately, and that he spent the next 60 years of his teaching life trying to put into words anyway. The ordinary mind was not the mind that had been purified and refined into something special. It was the mind that had been released from the need to be special. When you were hungry, hunger was itself the gate. When you were tired, tiredness was itself the gate. The bowl you washed was not a symbol of the pure mind. It was the pure mind going about its morning. The turnip you planted was not a teaching about the way. It was the way, pressing its roots into the dark earth. This was not a permission to be lazy or unconscious. It was something more demanding than any discipline Zhao Zhou had previously attempted, the complete relinquishment of the belief that the present moment was insufficient, that the mind as it was happening was inadequate, that the person he currently was needed to be fundamentally replaced by a better version before the real work could begin. There was a younger monk in the monastery, a former merchant's son named Weilin, who had arrived 3 years after Zhao Zhou with the same burning urgency, the same 3 days of walking behind him, the same question shaped like a bone beneath all his other questions. Zhao Zhou watched him the way you watch someone you recognize, not from this lifetime necessarily, but from some internal familiarity with the particular shape of a struggle. One evening, after the bell, Weilin came to Zhao Zhou, not yet the master, just the senior student with a face tight with frustration. "I have been here 3 years," he said. "I sit every morning. I carry water every afternoon. I observe my mind the way the teachers say. And I feel further from the way than when I arrived. I feel like there is something wrong with my mind specifically, like others have something I lack." Zhao Zhou looked at him for a moment. "When you carry the water," he said, "what do you feel? The weight of the jar? The effort in my shoulders? Sometimes my thoughts go elsewhere. And when your thoughts go elsewhere, what brings you back?" Weilin considered. "The weight of the jar," he said. "I feel it, and I return. And in that return," Zhao Zhou said, "what is present? A silence. Awareness," Weilin said slowly. "Just noticing." "That noticing," said Zhao Zhou, "is that a special state you had to cultivate? Is it a reward for 3 years of effort, or is it something that is simply there? As soon as you stop trying to have something else," Weilin was very still. "The mind that returns when you feel the weight of the jar," Zhao Zhou continued, "is not a mind that has achieved something. It is a mind that has briefly stopped trying to achieve something. Do you see the difference? I think," said Weilin slowly, "that I have been treating practice as a project to produce a better version of this mind. And the project itself is the problem. Because a mind engaged in a project of self-improvement is always looking toward some future state. And a mind always looking toward some future state cannot be present in this one. He paused, and something shifted in his face. So the present mind, the ordinary, noticing, water-carrying mind, that is already the thing, already the thing. Zhaozhou said simply, the thing that has been looking for the thing was always already the thing. It simply could not see itself, because it was looking for something more impressive. He paused. My teacher told me, the way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. It is as vast as the open sky. You cannot get closer to the sky by jumping toward it. You can only stop crouching. Zhaozhou lived to be 120 years old, one of the longest-lived figures in the entire Chan tradition. He taught for over 60 years. Students came from across China and from Korea to sit with him, and what they found was a man utterly without performance. He was known for answering the grandest questions with the smallest possible answers. Has a dog Buddha nature? No. What is the Buddha? The cypress tree in the courtyard. He made the tradition's most exalted concepts land in the most ordinary places, not to diminish them, but because he had learned, in 20 years of carrying water and washing bowls, that the ordinary place was the only place anything real had ever actually lived. The pattern he had arrived at the monastery, carrying the pattern of I am not yet enough, was not dissolved by achievement. It was dissolved by the discovery that achievement was not required, that the mind turning toward its own experience with simple, honest attention, that mind was already home. He did not arrive at this once and then possess it forever. He returned to it, the way you return to a room you love and know, each time, with recognition. Each time, without needing to redecorate it before you can rest there. There is a pattern that runs, very quietly, beneath the anxiety most of us carry about ourselves. It is not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself as self-doubt. Sometimes it is simply the feeling of being slightly ahead of the present moment, leaning toward the next thing, the better version, the moment when conditions will finally be right for you to feel at ease in your own life. The Chan tradition calls this striving mind, and what Nan Quan pointed at, and what Zhaozhou spent a lifetime embodying, is not the opposite of striving mind, not complacency, not passivity, but something subtler and more radical, the recognition that the awareness which is right here, right now, doing the noticing, carrying the water, washing the bowl, is not a lesser version of awakened mind. It is awakened mind, looking at itself, not recognizing what it sees because it expected something more impressive. What does your mind feel like right now? Not what you want it to feel like. Not the ideal meditator's mind, the perfectly calm mind, the mind that has done sufficient practice to deserve its rest. Just this. The actual texture of this moment, the slight heaviness of the body, the breath moving in and out, perhaps some thoughts still circling from the day, perhaps some quieter spaces between them. This is it. Not a stepping stone to it. Not a preliminary practice before the real thing. This noticing, this gentle, imperfect, ordinary awareness of what is actually happening, this is the ordinary mind that is the way, not because you have made it so, because it was already so, before you began trying. The bowl washed is not the symbol of clarity. The bowl washed is the clarity. The breath you are taking right now is not a technique for arriving somewhere else. The breath is already where you are trying to arrive. Feel your shoulders. Let them fall a little. Let the efforting mind, the mind that has been working all day to be adequate, to be enough, to arrive at some quieter version of itself, let that mind know it can rest now. Not because it has succeeded, because it was never actually insufficient. It was simply confused about what it was looking for. The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. It is as vast as the open sky. You don't need to jump toward it. You only need to stop crouching. Let your body choose its depth of rest now. Let your breath find its own pace. The ordinary is already extraordinary. You are already home. And you were home the whole long walk here. And as this old efforting, this reaching towards some better version of now, begins to settle into the earth like a long-held breath, finally released, we travel now across the sea, forward in time, to Japan in the 17th century, to a woman who had believed for 30 years that she was fundamentally unworthy of peace, and to the moment she discovered otherwise. Rest your body. Rest your mind. If sleep comes, welcome it. You don't need to stay awake for what comes next. The story will carry you regardless. The village of Hara, in Suruga province, lay at the foot of Mount Fuji on the flat coastal plain where the Tokaido Road ran between Kyoto and Edo. In the early 18th century, when Hakuin Ekaku had established himself at the small temple of Shoinji, the village was a place of fishermen and rice farmers and traveling merchants stopping to rest their feet. And the mountain behind everything was simply there, the way a fact is simply there, enormous, immovable, beautiful in a way that stopped being remarkable to those who lived beneath it every day. Among the people who came to sit with Hakuin in those years was a woman named Satsu. She had been coming for 3 years before she spoke to him about the thing she had carried the longest. 3 years of sitting in the meditation hall, a converted storage room that smelled of old cedar and lacquer. 3 years of the breath and the koan he had assigned her, and the slow, patient work of learning not to run from her own mind. She was 41 years old. She had been married at 16 and widowed at 26. And the years between had given her 2 children who were now grown, and a calloused quality to her hands, and a certain way she had of entering rooms, as though she were checking first to see whether she was welcome. She was not, by anyone's assessment, an obvious candidate for spiritual distinction. She ran a small dyeing business from her home, her hands permanently stained indigo blue to the wrists. And she was practical in the way that women who have survived difficulty without assistance tend to become practical, methodical, quietly competent, skeptical of anything that promised more than it could deliver. What had brought her to Shoinji in the first place was not spiritual hunger. Exactly. It was more that she had run out of ways to be busy. Her children had left. The business ran itself by then. She had found, in the first quietness of her life, that the quietness was not quiet at all, that it was full of things she had been successfully outrunning for 20 years, and that without the running, she was left alone with them. A neighbor had suggested the temple. Satsu had gone the way you go to something you don't quite believe in, but have nothing better to do with a kind of practical willingness, expecting nothing, prepared to be disappointed. What she had not expected was Hakuin's particular quality of attention. He was not a gentleman, in the way that word is usually meant. He was vigorous, demanding, sometimes baffling, occasionally infuriating. He had a laugh that could be heard across the temple grounds, and a way of assigning koans that felt less like giving a gift and more like handing someone a stone and watching them try to figure out what to do with it. But beneath all of that, and Satsu had learned, over 3 years, to look beneath all of that, there was a quality she could not name precisely. Something like the certainty of someone who has gone somewhere real and returned. He had told her, the 3rd time she sat with him privately, that she had a strong practice. She had looked at him with the expression she reserved for things she did not believe but did not wish to contradict openly. I am not sure I have any practice at all, she had said. I sit. I breathe. The koan sits in my chest like a stone I cannot move. Good, said Hakuin. A stone you cannot move is far more useful than a stone you carry so lightly you forget it's there. She had gone away and thought about this for several weeks, and concluded that she did not understand it, and returned. The thing she had carried the longest was this, a settled, permanent, bone-deep conviction that she was not the kind of person to whom the real things happened. Not enlightenment, she did not use that word, which felt too large and foreign, but peace, ease. The feeling she sometimes glimpsed in the faces of the older monks, something behind the eyes that had stopped struggling against itself. She did not believe that feeling was available to her, not because she was inadequate in any ordinary sense. She was competent. She knew that. But there was a layer beneath competence, a more fundamental layer, where she was somehow simply and irremediably not the right kind, not the right quality of person. As if the universe had organized people into those for whom grace was possible and those for whom it was not. And she had, through some accident of birth or character or accumulated failure, landed in the second category. She had never told anyone this. It was too embarrassing. It was the kind of belief that sounds, when said aloud, both melodramatic and obviously wrong. But she had carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe, not always noticing it, never quite forgetting it. It was a morning in early autumn when she finally said it to Hakuin. She had come for her regular meeting. The temple garden outside the window held the particular gold of maples in the first stages of turning, and the air was cool enough that she could see her own breath. She sat across from him in the small room and folded her hands in her lap and said, without quite planning to, I believe I am not the kind of person for whom this works. Hakuin looked at her with the directness that had initially unsettled her and had eventually become one of the things she valued most. What kind of person would that be? I don't know exactly. Someone more naturally inclined to stillness. Someone without my particular history. She paused. Someone, not me. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a maple leaf detached from its branch and drifted down across the window, amber, unhurried, complete. Tell me, he said, when you sit and the breath moves through you, who is breathing? She frowned. I am. And when you sit and the koan presses against your mind like a stone, who feels the pressure? I do. And in this moment, as you tell me that you are not the right kind of person who is noticing that belief, she opened her mouth, closed it. There is something in you, Hakuin said, that knows the belief. Something that observes it clearly enough to describe it to me. That something, is it also not the right kind? The question sat in the air between them the way good questions do, not demanding an answer immediately, giving the mind time to understand the shape of what it has been asked. The belief, he continued quietly, is itself a thought arising in the same awareness that notices all your other thoughts. The belief that you are uniquely unqualified is not a fact about you. It is a weather pattern in your mind, and the sky that the weather moves through is not stained by it. She looked at him for a long moment. I have believed it for a very long time, she said. I know, he said simply. Old weather is still weather. She did not have a dramatic awakening that day. She went home with her indigo-stained hands and her practical skepticism and her quiet, stone-heavy koan, and she did her dyeing and cooked her dinner and lay awake for a while in the dark the way she always lay awake. And the belief was still there, as it always was. But something had shifted in her relationship to it. A small but crucial distance had appeared. The belief was there, and she was aware of it being there, and those were not the same thing. Over the months that followed, she noticed the way you notice when something has been quietly moving and you only catch it when it stops, that she had begun to sit with herself differently. Not the dramatic differently of someone who has discovered a secret. The quiet differently of someone who has stopped bracing against a door that was, it turned out, not locked. She had been pressing against the door, and the pressing had been mistaken for the door being shut. The old story, "I am not the right kind," still arose sometimes. Habit is stubborn and does not die just because you have seen through it. But now when it arose, she could see it arising. She could watch it appear in the mind the way you watch a cloud appear in the autumn sky, noting it, not fighting it, not claiming it as truth. It was a cloud. The sky was not a cloud. One afternoon, in the following spring, she was in her dyeing room, her hands deep in an indigo vat, feeling the fabric move through the color beneath the surface, when something let go in her. She could not have said exactly what. It was not a thought or a realization exactly. It was more like the moment when the tide turns, no drama, just a direction of movement quietly reversing. The indigo on her hands, the smell of it deep and ancient and blue, the sound of a sparrow outside the paper screen, the warmth of the sun on the back of the building, the breath moving through her without her instruction. Everything exactly as it was. And in everything exactly as it was, a completeness she had not looked for and so could not have constructed. She stayed in that room for a long time. When she went to Hakuin and told him what had happened, with the careful, slightly embarrassed precision of someone describing something they know sounds unusual, he listened without any expression of surprise. "In the dyeing room?" he said. "Yes." He nodded. "The Buddha does not insist on special rooms," he said. He certified her understanding, and she went on to become a nun, and she practiced and taught for many more years. And those who sat with her in later life said that she had about her a quality they could not quite name, something like the stillness of someone who has stopped bracing against a door that was never locked, and has learned to use their hands for other things. There is something in Satsu's story that reaches directly into the part of us that has decided, quietly and firmly, that peace is available to everyone except ourselves specifically. This is not depression, not despair. It is something more specific and more insidious, a settled, low-grade conviction that we are constitutionally unsuited for ease, that other people's minds are naturally quieter, naturally kinder to themselves, that the rest and wholeness we seek is possible for others, while for us it will always remain on the other side of one more layer of insufficiency we have yet to address. Hakuin's question cuts through this with such surgical precision. Who is noticing that belief? Because there is always something doing the noticing, and the something that can watch a belief arise, that can see it clearly enough to describe it, to feel its weight, to be troubled by it, that something is not itself the belief. It is the space the belief appears in. It is the sky the cloud moves through. You cannot be closer to that sky than you already are. It is not behind the belief or beneath it or on the other side of sufficient practice. It is what is doing the looking right now. It is the awareness reading these words, receiving these sounds, feeling the weight of the blanket. The old story, "I am not the right kind," may be very old. Some of us have been carrying it since childhood, since the first time a teacher or parent or lover communicated, in some irreversible wordless way, that we were somehow subtly wrong. And old weather is, as Hakuin said, still weather, but it is not the sky. The sky that open, witnessing awareness that has been present through every moment of your life, that has never once been stained by the weather moving through it. It was clear when you were afraid. It was clear when you were ashamed. It was clear when you were certain you were unworthy of rest. The clarity was always already there, holding all of it, unchanged. Feel the weight of the blanket now. Feel the breath, not the breath you are making, but the breath that is making itself, using your body as its instrument. Feel the surface beneath you, steady and unhurried. Nothing to prove tonight, nothing to become. The dying room, with its smell of indigo and warm wood and the sparrow outside. Everything exactly as it is. Let the old weather drift. You don't have to clear the sky, it already is clear. You only have to notice what was always doing the noticing. Let your body grow heavier. Let your eyes close if they wish to. Let the breath slow to whatever pace the body wants. You are not working toward peace. You are already resting inside it, whether you can feel it in this moment or not. And as that old conviction, I am not the right kind, begins to thin and lighten, like cloud burning off in morning sun that was always shining behind it, we travel now, gently, across the ocean and the centuries, to a small island monastery off the coast of Korea, where a fisherman's question to a master was about to tear a hole in the fabric of ordinary thought through which something vast and wordless could breathe. Let your body settle. Let sleep come if it wishes. The stories will hold you. The yellow sea in November has a particular quality of grey that is not melancholy exactly, but is the colour that precedes understanding. The colour the sky goes before it decides what kind of day it will be. Off the western coast of the Korean peninsula, scattered through those shallow, cold waters, there were in the Joseon period small islands where fishermen built their houses low against the hillside, facing south, away from the worst wind, and where Buddhist monks sometimes came to live in hermitages so remote that even the official suppression of the dynasty found them difficult to reach. On one such island, in a monastery called Haesim Sea Heart, there lived a monk named Do-hyun, who had arrived 20 years before, carrying the particular burden of someone who has spent a great deal of time thinking about spiritual matters, without arriving anywhere that felt like ground. He had come to the monastery at 30, already having studied at 3 other temples on the mainland, already having spent years with Wadu practice, the Korean method of holding a single question in the center of one's mind with such sustained, intense attention that eventually the question either dissolves or explodes. And in either case, something is revealed. His question, the one he had been given by his first teacher, was the one that most Korean Seon monks worked with. What is this? Before your parents were born, what was your original face? He had sat with this question for 20 years. He had sat with it on the mainland, in cold halls and warm halls, in periods of clarity and periods so opaque he could barely remember why he had become a monk. He had sat with it on Haesim Island, in a small stone cell overlooking the sea, listening to the yellow sea move against the rocks with the patient indifference of something that has never once worried about its own nature. At 50, Do-hyun had arrived at a condition he could only describe as exhausted suspension. The question was still there, alive in his chest, but the urgency had gone out of it. He no longer believed, as he once had, that the answer was just beyond the next season of intensive practice. He no longer believed it was just beyond the next teacher, the next retreat, the next clearing of some final obstacle. He had, as quietly and completely as snow falls, given up believing that he was going to arrive anywhere at all. He continued to practice. He continued to sit, not because he expected anything from it, but because it was who he was. The way a bird continues to fly, not because it is trying to get somewhere in particular, but because flying is the expression of what it is. The fisherman came in early November, on a small wooden boat that moved through the low chop of the harbor with the confidence of something that has done this 10,000 times and does not require thinking about. His name was Seokji, and he was 53 years old. A man built along the lines of someone who has spent decades hauling nets, broad shoulders, arms that hung slightly forward from the shoulder joint, hands that were the color and texture of old rope. He came to the island twice a month to sell fish to the monastery kitchen, and he had done this for 12 years. And in those 12 years he had exchanged perhaps 40 sentences with the monks. This day he came with more fish than usual and with a question he had been carrying for 4 months. Since his youngest son had left for the mainland and the house he returned to each evening had taken on the quality of a room where everything is exactly as it was, except that the essential thing is missing, he found Do-hyun in the vegetable garden, digging up the last of the autumn turnips before the ground hardened. And he stood at the edge of the garden, holding his basket of fish and watching the monk work for a while before he spoke. "Sunim," he said, using the honorific with the careful awkwardness of someone not accustomed to speaking to monks. "Can I ask you something?" Do-hyun looked up. 30 years of monastic life had given him the quality of attention that is neither warm nor cold, but simply open the way. A clear pool is neither warm nor cold, but simply receives whatever the sky offers. "Of course," he said. "My son is gone," Seokgi said. He went to find work. Garm, and I understand that it's the right thing. But the house feels times, he stopped. I sit in the evening where we used to sit together, and I feel like I have lost something from inside myself. Not just from the house, from inside. As if part of what I was is gone with him. He paused again, turning his fish basket in his hands. Is that what you study here? How to not feel that way?" Do-hyun set down his trowel and straightened slowly, pressing his hands to the small of his back in the universal gesture of a body that has been bending too long. "No," he said. "We do not study how to not feel it. The feeling is real. Your son is gone. The emptiness in the house is real. I would not want to take that from you. It is part of love." Seokgi nodded, looking at his basket. "But then what do you study?" "We study," Do-hyun said, "what it is that is feeling the loss. What is the thing inside you that noticed something was missing?" "What is that?" Seokgi looked up. "Me," he said. "Yes. And what is that? If you set aside your name, your age, your work, your role as father, what is still here?" The fisherman stood with this for a long moment. Behind him, the yellow sea moved through its grey November variations, and a single gull crossed the sky from east to west without any apparent interest in the conversation taking place below it. "I don't know," Seokgi said at last, with the candor of someone who is too tired to be diplomatic. "Good," said Do-hyun. "That not knowing that is the beginning. Will you come back tomorrow morning, before your boat leaves?" The fisherman came back the next morning before the light had fully established itself, when the sky above the sea was the color of old bone and the air smelled of kelp and cold stone. Do-hyun was already sitting on the small terrace outside his cell, facing the water, and he gestured to the stone beside him without turning around. Seokgi sat. He was not comfortable. The stone was cold, and he had not slept well, and he was not, in any ordinary sense, a man who sat quietly looking at water when there was work to be done. But something in him had been asking its own version of Do-hyun's question all night, and he was tired enough of not knowing the answer to stay with the discomfort. They sat without speaking for a while. The light came in slowly from the east, touching the far rim of the sea first and then moving toward them across the water. A fishing boat somewhere to the south had lit its lamp, and that lamp made a long, trembling path across the still closer water. "When you are hauling a net," Do-hyun said eventually, "and the net is very heavy, what is it that pulls?" "My arms," Seok-gi said. "My back. My legs against the gunwale." "And if someone asked you, in that moment of pulling, 'What are you?' would you say, 'I am a man pulling a net. That is what I would be doing.' But are you the pulling? Or are you the one who is aware of the pulling? Are you the effort? Or are you what knows the effort is happening?" Seok-gi was quiet for a long time. A small wave came in and broke against the rocks below them and retreated, hissing through the stone. "The one who knows," he said slowly. "Now, when your son left, and you felt that emptiness in the house and in yourself, were you the emptiness, or were you aware of the emptiness?" Something shifted in Seok-gi's face. It was not a dramatic shift, not the face of a man having a revelation. It was more like the face of a man recognizing something he had not expected to recognize. "I was aware of it," he said. "And that awareness," Do-hyun said, "was it empty?" The fisherman sat with this question, the way he sat with difficult weather, not fighting it, not rushing it, letting it move through him at its own speed. "No," he said. It was just there. Clear. Even when what it was aware of was the emptiness. "Yes," said Do-hyun simply. They sat with this for a while longer. The light continued its slow work across the water. The lamp on the distant fishing boat was no longer visible as the day brightened. "My teacher," Do-hyun said at last, "used to say that the one mind is what has never been lost. Not for a moment. Not for a single breath. In any life that has ever been lived. We lose things. We lose sons to the mainland, and parents to the grave, and our own youth to the years. These losses are real. But the one who is aware of the losses that one has never been diminished by them. It cannot be diminished. It is what diminishment appears within." He paused. "The emptiness you feel in your house, that is true, and it will change shape over time, as all feelings do. But the awareness in which that emptiness appears, that is what you are. And that has your son in it, too. Not as a loss. As a presence. Because love does not leave when its object leaves. Love is in the awareness, not in the object." Seok-gi was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, not changed exactly, but dropped a register, the way a man's voice drops when he is speaking about something real rather than navigating something difficult. "I can feel that," he said. "It's strange. The emptiness is still there. But it feels less like a hole and more like times." He searched for a word. "More like water. Like it can move." "It will move," Do-hyun said. "Everything that appears in the mind moves. The awareness that holds it does not." He looked at the fisherman with the quality of attention that had been 20 years in the making, 20 years of sitting with a question in a stone cell above a grey November sea. "Your original face," he said softly. "Before your son was born, before you became his father, what were you? That thing has not gone anywhere. It was here this morning before the light came. It will be here when you sail home. It is what noticed the emptiness, and it is what is noticing the light arriving now." Seok-gi looked at the sea. The light was full and silver now, and the water moved with the particular aliveness of something that has never questioned its own nature, and so moves without hesitation, without self-consciousness, without anything left out. "I think," he said slowly, "I have been carrying my son like a net full of rocks, afraid that if I let the grief move freely, it will take him away entirely. But if I hold the grief tightly, to keep from losing him, then I cannot feel the part of him that is still here. Yes, said Do-yun. A long pause. The gull that had crossed the sky the previous morning, or one exactly like it, made its slow ellipse above the water. Let the net down, the fisherman said, to no one in particular. And he sat there in the morning light while the grief, released from its rigid holding, moved through him the way a sea moves through the spaces between rocks, not breaking anything, not taking anything away, simply moving as water moves when it is allowed to be what it is. Do-yun said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. He had asked the question that his 20 years of practice had prepared him to ask, and it had done what good questions do not answer itself but dissolve the frame that made answering seem necessary. When Sogi finally stood and picked up his empty fish basket, he moved differently, not transformed in the dramatic way the stories promise, but with the specific ease of someone who has set down something heavy they had not realized they were carrying. He bowed to the monk with more depth than he had intended to bow, and walked down the stone path to the harbor, and sailed home through the grey November sea that had never once worried about its own nature and did not begin to worry now. Do-hyun returned to his cell and sat down, and for the first time in many months, he sat with his wadu, not as a task to accomplish, but as a companion. He had been walking beside for 20 years, through seasons and islands, and the slow, patient opening that practice makes possible without forcing. What is this? He thought. Before your parents were born, what was your original face? He looked at the sea. The sea, as always, simply was. There is a particular kind of letting go that this story points toward, not the dramatic, effortful, releasing that self-improvement culture tends to celebrate, but the quieter one, the letting of the net down. The discovery that what you have been holding so tightly, in the belief that holding is the only way to keep it, was actually most present when your grip relaxed. Many of us carry the people we love the way Soki carried his son tightly, tensely, with the fear that any loosening of the hold will mean losing them entirely. And so the grief becomes rigid, and the rigidity becomes its own kind of wall between us and the love we are trying to protect. The held thing cannot move, and so it cannot breathe. And what is held so tightly that it cannot breathe cannot be truly felt. But the awareness in which love lives that is not diminished when its object moves away. The one mind, as the old Korean teachers called it, is not smaller when loss visits it. It is the same sky, receiving whatever comes. The love is in the knowing, not in the known. This is not a teaching that asks you to stop grieving. Grief is real. Loss is real. The empty chair is a real chair. The teaching is not that you should feel otherwise. The teaching is that what is aware of the grief, what is feeling it, noticing it, living through it, that is vaster than the grief. It has room for everything. It is not diminished by anything it receives. Let that awareness be present now. Don't try to manufacture it, it's already here. It is what is receiving these words right now. What is aware of the weight of your body, the temperature of the air, the sound of whatever sounds surround you. Feel the breath, the one that is happening right now, without your effort. The air entering, the air leaving, the brief pause between, and in that brief pause a completeness that asks nothing, holds nothing, loses nothing. Let the nets down. Whatever you have been holding tightly tonight, whatever grief or worry or tenderness you have been clutching against your chest in the fear that loosening will mean losing, you can let it begin to move now. Not away. Just freely, the way the sea moves through the spaces between rocks. Not breaking anything, not taking anything away. You are still here. You will still be here. The awareness that has accompanied you through every moment of this long day will accompany you into the deep rest that is coming now. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breath slow. Let whatever feelings are moving in you move the way water moves freely, without clutching, without shame. They will move through. They always do. The sky remains, and as that deep, quiet releasing continues, as the grief and the worry and the tight-held tenderness begin to drift like clouds across a vast and unchanging sky, we travel now to one of the most ancient of all the traditions gathered tonight, moving back to India, to the forest monasteries of the Theravada world, where a young monk had been sitting with an impossible question for 7 days and was about to discover that the impossibility was the point. Let your eyes be heavy now. Let the body choose how deeply to rest. You don't have to stay awake for what comes. Let the stories carry you. The awareness is still here, and it knows the way home. Sleep permission cue. If your eyes have already closed, let them stay closed. You don't need to stay awake for what comes next. Let these words simply carry you. There is a region of northeastern Thailand, the area known as Isan, where the land is flat and wide, and the sky above it is enormous, in the way that skies are only enormous when there is nothing tall enough to interrupt them. In the hot season, the ground turns the color of old terracotta, and the teak trees hold their leaves tightly. And in the rainy season, everything becomes suddenly wildly green, as if the land had been holding its breath for months and finally releases it all at once. At night, in the forests between the villages, the sound is continuous insects and frogs, and the occasional movement of something larger through the undergrowth, a living sound that never stops. Not for a moment. The way a river never stops. It was in these forests that the wandering monks of the Kamatthana tradition made their practice, following the path that Ajahn Mun Buddhidhatto had walked before them and the Buddha had walked before, that the path of the bhikkhu, who carries only his robes and his bowl and whatever clarity the forest is willing to give him. Sleeping under the shelter of his umbrella tent hung between the trees, waking before the light, sitting in the dark with the enormous sound of the living forest and the question of who, exactly, is sitting here. In the dry season of 1934, a young monk named Somchai had been wandering these forests for 3 months, following at some distance behind a more senior monk who had studied directly under Ajahn Mun and who spoke rarely and walked fast and seemed, to Somchai, to be existing in an entirely different relationship to the forest than Somchai himself was managing. Somchai was 24 years old. He had come from a farming family in Ubon Ratchathani province and had ordained at 20, primarily because his uncle was a monk and his mother had prayed for one of her sons to take robes, and Somchai had been, of her 3 sons, the one most willing to disappoint himself in service of someone else's peace of mind. He had not expected to find the practice so absorbing. He had not expected to find himself, 3 years into his robes, genuinely and urgently interested in the question that every forest monk was assigned to carry. Who is aware? The question had seemed simple when it was first given to him. He had sat with it for 3 years and discovered that it was not simple at all, that the closer he looked at it, the stranger the territory became. The way a familiar face becomes strange if you look at it too long. The features dissolving into shapes that no longer resemble anything you know. What troubled him specifically, in those months of wandering, was a version of the question he could not answer. If everything that he thought of as himself, his name, his history, his preferences, his fears, his carefully maintained sense of being a particular person who had come from a particular family and was going somewhere in particular, if all of that was, as the teaching said, anicca, impermanent, arising and passing away like weather, Then what was left? The teaching seemed to promise that what remained was something vast and clear and free. But when he looked for it, he found only more thoughts, more mental movements, more of the same restless water that had always been there. He was, in other words, trying to find the still water by looking at the ripples. The more senior monk, whose name was Luang Phokam, made camp in the early afternoon beside a small river that moved through a grove of bamboo with the sound of something rushing but unhurried. He hung his umbrella tent from a branch and sat cross-legged beneath it, and appeared immediately to become something that was less like a person waiting and more like a rock that had been there for a very long time. Somchai made his own camp some distance away and sat and was immediately aware of all the things he was aware of: the mosquitoes, the sound of the water, the heat, the particular quality of light through the bamboo, his back, which ached slightly from the morning's walking, the thought about his mother which visited him most evenings around this time, the thought after the thought about his mother, which was a thought about whether he was a good son for having left, the thought after that thought, which was a thought about whether a monk should be thinking about whether he is a good son, and so on. The mind making its endless chain of connections that he had been trying, for 3 years, to interrupt. He sat this way for what felt like a very long time. Then the sun moved, and the quality of the light through the bamboo changed, and the shadows lengthened across the ground in front of him, and a small brown bird landed 6 feet away and tilted its head at him with an expression of complete indifference. And something in the relentlessness of his own mental commentary became, for just a moment, visible to him in a new way. He found himself thinking, all of this is happening. The mosquitoes and the river and the thought about my mother and the thought about the thought. All of it arising. All of it passing. The thought about whether I am a good son, it arose. And then something else arose. And nothing asked my permission. He sat with this observation. It was not new. He had read it in texts. He had been told it by teachers. But there is a difference between knowing something as a proposition and seeing it as a fact. The way there is a difference between knowing that water is wet and having water touch your hand. The thoughts were arising. He was not producing them. They were weather. They were happening the way the bamboo was happening, the way the bird's tilt of head was happening, the way the sound of the river was happening without his instruction, without his permission, arising out of conditions he had not chosen and passing back into conditions he could not control. And something was watching all of it. That something, the awareness itself, was not producing the thoughts either. It was simply present for them. It had been present for all the thoughts that morning about the walking and the heat and whether he had filled his water bowl adequately. It would be present for whatever thoughts came in the morning. It was present now for the small brown bird, which had tilted its head once more and flown away. He realized, with a quiet that was different from the quiet he usually manufactured through effort, that he had been trying to become the awareness. He had been pursuing it, chasing it with his mind, trying to catch something that was already doing the looking. The seeker and the sought were the same movement. That evening, as the light failed completely and the forest sound rose to its nighttime pitch, Somchai walked to where Luang Phokam was sitting. He did not speak immediately. He sat beside the older monk for a long time, long enough that several large moths came and went from the lamp flame that burned between them. I think, Somchai said at last, I have been looking for the sky in the clouds. Luang Phokam waited. The thoughts, Somchai said, I have been trying to clear them to find something behind them. But what's behind them is what is already watching them. And it can't be found by the mind because it's what the mind appears in. The older monk looked at him for a long moment in the lamplight. "What found this?" he asked. Somchai opened his mouth and stopped, because the answer was immediately obvious and immediately unspeakable. Nothing had found it. The finding was the awareness itself, briefly recognizing itself. The way a mirror becomes briefly aware that what it has been reflecting all along is its own reflecting. "Yes," said Luang Fo Kham. "Stay with that." He did not elaborate. He did not congratulate. He turned back to his sitting, and the forest continued its enormous living sound around them both. And the lamp flame moved in the small evening wind, and neither of them spoke again until morning. In the weeks that followed, Somchai found that something had changed in the quality of his practice, not dramatically, not completely, not in the way that stories sometimes promise, but the desperate quality, the grasping quality, the sense of something missing that needed urgently to be found that had softened. Not because he had arrived somewhere, but because he had begun to understand that the looking itself was what he had been looking for, and that the looking never stops, and that this is not a problem. He continued wandering. He continued sitting. He continued having thoughts about his mother, and about whether he was a good son, and about the heat, and about all the other ordinary contents of a mind that has not gone anywhere special, but has begun to watch its own arising with something approaching curiosity rather than something approaching despair. Luang Fo Kham, asked about him later by another monk, said only, "He learned to stop digging for water in the river. The sky does not chase the clouds. This is worth sitting with tonight, in the darkness, with the weight of the body becoming heavier in the bed. The sky simply remains. Whether the clouds are dense and grey and covering every visible inch, or whether the sky is open and clear from one horizon to the other, the sky remains the same sky, unmodified by what passes through it. The clouds do not make the sky cloudy. They are clouds passing through a sky that is, by its nature, clear. Your thoughts are clouds. Your feelings tonight, the tiredness, the undone things, the quiet worry that has followed you into this dark room, these are clouds. They are real. They are present. The sky does not deny them. The sky does not fight them or rush them or wish them into different shapes. The sky simply remains, open, receiving whatever comes, unchanged by what passes through. You are not the tiredness. You are what is aware of the tiredness. You are not the worry. You are what notices the worry arising. You are not the thought about tomorrow. You are the vast quiet that the thought about tomorrow is floating through right now. This moment, as you lie here in the dark. This is the teaching of the forest monks, earned not in libraries, but under bamboo groves beside small rivers, through seasons of insects and rain, and the patient practice of looking until the looking itself became the answer. The mind is vast, vaster than any of its contents, vaster than the worst thought you have had about yourself, the deepest fear, the most insistent worry. These are small clouds in a very large sky. Let the clouds drift. They will. They always do. The sky requires nothing of you. It requires no maintenance, no improvement, no special conditions. It is already present. It is already vast. It is what is receiving these words right now. What is aware of the breath slowing? What is aware of the body, releasing its held tension inch by inch into the surface beneath it? You don't need to clear your mind to sleep. The thoughts can continue rising and falling, the way the river continues whether you watch it or not. You are not responsible for stopping them. You are the awareness in which they appear, and that awareness open, clear, unclouded by anything that passes through it, is already at rest. Already at rest. Already whole. Already home. Feel the weight of the blanket now. Feel the surface beneath you, steady and unmovable. Feel the breath, not the breath you are making, but the breath that is making itself, the ancient rhythm that has been breathing bodies since long before any of the thoughts in your mind were born. The sky remains. You remain. Whatever clouds pass tonight, they will pass. They always pass. The sky never asks them to stay, and they never do. Let your body grow heavier still. Let the eyes rest. Let the thoughts continue their gentle arising and passing without your supervision. You don't need to watch them anymore. Something else is watching. Something that has always been watching. Something that was watching before you knew its name and will be watching long after you have stopped trying to find it. Rest in that watching now. Let it carry you. It knows the way. And as the vastness of the sky settles into you, like cool air into a warm room, as the sense of being a person who must manage and achieve and become begins to thin and lighten into something simpler, something older, something that has no agenda and no edge, we travel now, for the last time tonight, to a mountain monastery in the highlands of Sri Lanka, where the oldest of all the forest traditions was laid down in the ancient Pali language, and where a novice nun who could not sleep found the most profound teaching waiting in the simplest place imaginable. Let the body sink. Let the eyes stay closed. Let what comes next be received not by the mind, but by the deeper part of you that rests beneath it. You have done enough. You have arrived. Sleep permission cue. You have traveled far tonight. Let this last story be received not with the thinking mind, but with the body, the breath, the weight, the warmth. You don't need to remember any of this. Let it simply move through you the way water moves through cupped hands, leaving behind only what it leaves behind, taking with it what it takes. In the time of the Buddha, along the foothills of what is now the region of Bihar in northeastern India, there were forest groves called arama, quiet places set apart from the village roads where the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the monks and nuns of the Sangha, established their simple communities of huts and meditation paths and the ancient, unhurried rhythms of a life organized entirely around waking up. The grove called Velukanara, the bamboo thicket, lay 3 miles east of a small market town whose name has not survived. It was not a famous grove. No great teachers had attained their liberation there. No suttas bore its name. It was simply a quiet place where the bamboo grew thick enough to break the heat of the afternoon, where a small stream ran clear over flat stones, where in the early morning the light came in at a low angle through the eastern edge of the trees and turned the dew on the grass into something briefly luminous before the day's business began. There were 11 bhikkhunis living in Velukanara during the rain's retreat when this story takes place, senior nuns and junior nuns, and 1 novice who had been brought to the grove 6 months earlier by her aunt, herself a bhikkhuni of many years, who had recognized in her niece a quality of attention that the village schoolroom and the spinning wheel and the expected life of a young woman in that time and place would not have known what to do with. The novice's name was Neela. She was 17 years old. She had been spinning thread since she was 8 and reciting scripture since she was 12, and she had, in all that time, never once been able to sit still inside her own mind. The other nuns seemed to her, in those early months, to possess some basic capacity. She had been born without a quality of settledness, of interior quiet, that she watched in them the way a person who cannot swim watches others moving through water, wondering what fundamental element of understanding they possess that she does not. She meditated the way a person who cannot stop thinking meditates with great effort and very little peace, counting breaths and losing count, beginning again, finding that the mind had wandered not to interesting places, but to the same small territories it always wandered to, the faces of her mother and younger sisters. A piece of unfinished business from a conversation 3 weeks ago. The question of whether she had properly washed her bowl after the morning meal. The question of whether it mattered, whether she had properly washed her bowl. And so on. Round and round. A wheel that would not stop. She had begun, in her 6th month, to lie awake at night. Not with fear, exactly. With a particular quality of wakefulness that felt involuntary, the mind refusing to release its grip on the day, going over and over its contents, the way hands go over fabric, looking for a pulled thread, finding nothing wrong but unable to stop searching. The other bhikkhunis slept around her in the soft darkness of the dormitory hall, their breathing slow and even, and Neela lay among them feeling as if she were made of a different material wound tighter, unable to put herself down the way they put themselves down, as simply and completely as setting a lamp in its holder. The eldest of the bhikkhunis at Velukanara was a woman named Sumana. She was 63 years old and had been a nun for 31 of those years, and she moved through the grove with the particular quality of someone who has long since stopped needing the world to be different from what it is. She was not serene in a distant or untouchable way. She laughed at things. She was interested in the small lives of the insects in the garden and the behavior of the bamboo in different winds. She made very good rice gruel. But there was about her a quality of not needing. A quality of having arrived in herself so completely that she carried the arrival everywhere she went, the way a lamp carries its light into any room it enters without trying. Neela had been watching her for 6 months with the mixed feeling of admiration and despair that one has when confronted with a quality one believes oneself incapable of. One evening, in the week before the full moon of the 8th month, Neela found herself still awake long after the rest of the dormitory had gone quiet. The sound of the bamboo in the night wind came through the open screen, a soft, continuous sound, like running water, like breath. The lamp in the corner of the hall had burned down to its last small flame, the wick almost spent, the oil nearly gone. She heard, rather than saw, that Sumana was awake too, the particular quality of stillness that differs from sleep, a stillness that is present rather than absent. "Neela," Sumana said softly, "not a question." "I cannot sleep," Neela said. The words felt too large for the quiet room. "I cannot make my mind be still. I have tried everything the instructions say. I count the breath. I come back to the breath. I come back to the breath again. But the mind She stopped. "The mind goes," Sumana said. "Yes." A pause. The bamboo spoke to itself outside the screen. "What does it do? When it goes, it thinks," Neela said. "About things that have already happened. About things that have not happened yet. About things that probably will not happen at all. It will not stop." Another pause. The lamp flame shortened, pulled toward itself by the dwindling wick. "When the mind goes to yesterday," Sumana said, "does yesterday come back?" Neela thought about this. "No." "And when it goes to tomorrow, does tomorrow arrive?" "No." So the mind travels and travels, and nothing it travels to actually appears. Only the traveling appears. A small pause. Only the traveling appears. Neela. And what is doing the noticing of that traveling? The question landed in the quiet room and did not demand an immediate answer. The lamp flame shortened again. "I don't know," Neela said. Slowly. Something that is here while the mind travels. Something that does not travel. She felt, as she said this, a quality of recognition she did not have a name for, yet the way a word you have been trying to remember comes back, not when you search for it, but in the moment you stop searching. Yes, Sumana said. That. The lamp flame at the corner of the room found its last thread of wick. For a moment it brightened slightly the way a flame does at the very end, as if gathering itself, and then it went out. Not dramatically, not slowly. Simply, it was there, and then it was not. And the darkness that came was not emptier than before, but fuller. A different kind of presence. The darkness that was always there beneath the light, simply becoming visible. The room was not dark. Moonlight moved through the screen in the long, slow stripes that the bamboo threw across the floor, shifting as the wind moved. Neela lay in the moonlight, and the bamboo sound, and the darkness where the lamp had been, and she noticed that she was not thinking about tomorrow anymore. She was not thinking about yesterday. She was aware of the moonlight, of the sound, of the warmth of her own body through the thin cloth of her robe, of the breath that was entering and leaving without her supervision. The ancient breath that had been doing this for 17 years without once asking her permission or requiring her help. Something in her loosened, not dramatically, not completely. The way a fist loosens when the hand finally stops holding something, it no longer needs to hold a slow, involuntary releasing that she was barely in charge of. The releasing doing itself the way the breath does itself, from somewhere below the level of decision. She thought, just this. Not as a teaching, as a fact. Just this room. Just this breath. Just this darkness where the lamp had been. And somewhere in that noticing, in that simple, unforced awareness of just thisness, the boundary between wakefulness and sleep became very thin. As thin as the membrane between a pond's surface and its depth. And she was not sure which side she was on. And it did not matter. And she stopped asking. And the bamboo continued its soft and endless conversation with the wind. And the moonlight continued its patient, slow crossing of the floor. And somewhere in all of that simply continuing, she was gone. In the morning, she woke before the bell. The grove was still grey, the light not yet committed to the day. The air holding the cool that night, leaves behind like a gift. She lay for a moment in the particular quality of having slept, not the triumphant awakeness of having solved something, but the quiet ordinariness of a body that had finally, without her help, found its way home. Sumana was already sitting, cross-legged, her back to the eastern screen, her face turned slightly toward where the light would eventually come. Neela sat up and looked at the empty lamp holder in the corner. The wick was a small dark curl. The oil was gone. The flame was gone. But the room was entirely itself full, quiet, waiting for the day with neither eagerness nor reluctance. She thought of what the elder nuns sometimes said, that the mind freed from grasping is like the lamp when the oil is spent, not destroyed, not diminished, simply no longer burning itself up for the sake of light it does not need. She did not say any of this to Sumana. She simply sat with the morning, breathing, and outside, the bamboo began again its conversation with the first small breeze of the day. And somewhere in the middle distance, a bird said one clear note into the growing light. And there was nothing to add. And so we arrive, together, at the end of the night's long journey. The lamp at the edge of the room has found its wick. Just this moment, just this breath, just the dark and the quiet and the weight of the body that has been carrying you through the whole long day and is now, finally, willing to set itself down. You have traveled tonight through many centuries and many lives. Through a young Korean monk and a fisherman's question above a grey November sea. Through the indigo-stained hands of a woman who stopped bracing against a door that was never locked. Through the ancient bamboo groves of the northeast Thai forest, where a monk learned to stop looking for water in the ripples of the water. And here, now, to this simplest of rooms, this night room where a lamp goes out and a mind, finally, stops traveling. The teaching tonight was never about understanding. It was about this breath, this darkness, this quiet that has been waiting beneath all the day's noise and motion, like the stillness at the bottom of a deep and clear pond. All the stories you heard of wholeness, discovered not at the end of a journey, but in the middle of an ordinary life. Not in a moment of triumph, but in the moment of letting go. Those stories were never really about monks in ancient forests or nuns in bamboo groves. They were always about you, about this body, now, about this breath that needs nothing added to it, about this awareness open, vast, unhurried, that has been present through every word of this long night and will be present when all the words are gone. Let the details of the stories go. They have done their work. What remains beneath the names and the faces and the centuries is simply this: the recognition that you were never broken, that the peace you have been searching for was never somewhere else, that the lamp was always in the room. These stories are offered as contemplative companions for rest, not as treatment or remedy, but as ancient human wisdom shared across the centuries from those who sat in the dark and found that the dark was not empty. Let the breath be slow now. Slower. The body can release whatever remains of the day, each muscle, each held place, each small point of tension, simply given back to the surface that holds you, back to the darkness that receives you, back to the silence that has always been here. Let the thoughts continue their arising if they wish. You don't need to stop them. They will do what the lamp did, find their wick, burn as they need to burn, and when the oil is gone, go out on their own. You need only watch without chasing, rest without resisting, be here without needing here to be different. Just this breath, just this quiet that asks nothing, just this right here, right now, which has always been enough, which has always been whole, which is home. Sleep well. The bamboo is still speaking to the wind. The moonlight is still crossing the floor. Everything is continuing without you, the way everything always does when you finally, gratefully, let it. You are already whole. Sleep. You have traveled tonight through 8 lifetimes of wisdom, through the mountains of ancient Korea, where a young monk discovered that the awareness, noticing his confusion, was itself never confused, through the mist of Yen-Tu Mountain, where a king who had everything walked away barefoot and found, in a simple wooden cell open to the rain, that the treasure had been inside him all along. Through the streets of Sravasti, where a grieving mother carrying an impossible weight learned that she was not uniquely broken, only exquisitely human. Through the tea house of ancient China, where a young seeker discovered that ordinary mind, released from its need to be extraordinary, is the very nature of the way. Through the dying room in Hara, where a woman with indigo-stained hands stopped bracing against a door that was never locked. Through the grey November sea off the coast of Korea, where a fisherman learned to let the net down, and the grief moved freely, the way water moves when it is finally allowed to be water. Through the bamboo forest of northeast Thailand, where a wandering monk discovered that the sky does not chase the clouds and never needed to. And finally, through the quiet lamplit room where a young nun lay awake and found that the mind, when no longer asked to travel, simply arrives at this moment, at this breath, at this whole and sufficient now. These are your stories too. Every tradition that found its way into tonight's hours was pointing at the same thing, in its own language, with its own particular beauty, that what you are is already whole. That the searching mind has always been moving through an open sky, that you were never as lost as the searching felt. If you would like to continue traveling with us, if these stories have been companions on the path toward rest, we would be grateful for your subscription. Sharing this channel with someone who needs sleep, or who is quietly searching for something they cannot yet name, is one of the kindest things you can offer. It costs nothing. It may mean everything to someone lying awake in their own dark room tonight. But that is for the morning. For now there is nothing to do, nothing to remember, nothing to become. The lamp has found its wick. The breath is breathing itself. You may carry tonight's wisdom not in your mind, but in the deeper place, where all genuine learning goes below thought, below effort, below the need to understand. Let it settle there. Let it work quietly, the way roots work in the dark, the way seeds absorb water long before the green appears. You are already whole. You were whole before tonight began. You will be whole when morning comes. Sleep well, dear traveler. The bamboo is still speaking to the wind. The sky remains. You are home. Good night.